At 17:06 local time, 9 Tomahawks dropped to the wave tops of the Gulf of Oman and tore northwest, on their way to turn the naval base of Bandar Abbas into Iran's newest parking lot. From the destroyer, the launch looked flawless. Then, 4 minutes in, an Iranian radar on the coastline ahead swept the water and did something no radar should be able to do. It saw them. Inside a bunker on Iran's Makran coast, the operator leaned into his scope and ran the sweep again. Faint hits at wave height, 40 kilometers past his horizon. He checked the set for a fault, found none, and keyed his handset with the calm of a man reporting something impossible. Multiple contacts, low, inbound. Then he did the most dangerous thing an Iranian radar operator did all night. He kept transmitting. The chain fast, sector command, then the coastal defense net, then every battery officer within reach of a field phone. Along 300 kilometers of coastline, crews rolled out of chairs and pulled tarps off launchers. One radar operator, trusting his own eyes, had just put an entire coast on its feet. What he just pulled off should have been impossible. A missile at 10 meters hides behind the curve of the Earth until roughly 30 kilometers. On most nights, 9 sea-skimming Tomahawks cross the whole Gulf as ghosts. But the summer Gulf builds an evaporation duct, a blanket of warm, wet air lying right on the water that traps radar energy and bends it far past the horizon. A whisper carrying across a still lake at dawn. The physics had been quietly rewired in Iran's favor, free of charge. No jammer ever built switches off the atmosphere. He had seen too much too soon. The report reached the strike frequency 90 seconds later, and it broke the plan. The jamming was scripted for 1724, the moment the Tomahawks were supposed to cross into that radar's normal horizon. The duct had just moved the horizon. Wait for the script, and the radar tracks the missiles for 11 clean minutes and feeds every battery on the coast. Jam now, and the noise itself announces the strike 12 minutes early and starts the clock on the other end, because jamming is not a wall, it degrades. Every minute of it spent now is a minute missing at the target. The Growler crew got the change over Link 16 and executed it in under a minute. Noise flooded the coastal radar's frequency, and the operator's impossible contacts dissolved into static. The stopwatch was running on both sides of the beach. The Growler is an EA-18G, a Super Hornet rebuilt to carry jamming pods instead of bombs. It picks no fights of its own. Its whole job is to blind the enemy long enough for everyone behind it to work. The trade even has a name: SEED, Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses, and it's a timing game before it's anything else. And Link 16, the encrypted network that gives every American jet and ship in theater one real-time picture, is how a plan gets rewritten mid-flight in 60 seconds without anyone keying a radio. The plan was new, the clock wasn't. 26 minutes to impact. Back on the destroyer, the tactical action officer, pronounced Teo, had bigger problems than a broken schedule. A new track bloomed at the edge of his picture, low and fast, right on the water, closing. Iran had answered the tanker strikes in kind. Noor anti-ship cruise missiles, ASCMs, thrown back within hours at the ships that had just fired. Iran calls it the Noor. The rest of the world knows it as a copy of China's Charlie 802, a sea skimmer riding 5 to 10 meters off the water at just under the speed of sound, carrying a 165-kilogram warhead built to break a ship's back. Picture a telephone pole doing 600 miles an hour, one boat length off the water. The same family mauled an Israeli warship off Lebanon in 2006 and ripped open 3 tankers that morning. By evening, they were coming for gray hulls. The track gave him 9 seconds. That's the arithmetic of a wave-top missile at that range. 9 seconds before a real Noor crossed inside the point where his last-ditch defenses take over the problem. And those were short seconds on a ship that currently had its own identical missiles outbound through the same sky. The combat system asked only one question that mattered: is this one ours? Aegis tracks every Tomahawk it fires from the second it clears the cell to the second it hits. The track handed ship to ship across the network, so it's never an orphan. This contact had no birth certificate. It had appeared from a bearing no friendly corridor used, on a course nothing American was flying. Worse than he wanted. Exactly what he drilled for. Cooperative Engagement Capability, the network that fuses every ship's radar into a single shared view, confirmed the geometry. inbound, not outbound. An SM-2 screamed out of the forward cells, and the Teo felt the launch as a thud through the deck plates before he ever saw the plume. 11 miles from the hull, the Noor stopped existing. The ship's workhorse air defense missile had just done exactly what the American taxpayer bought it for. Two identical cars merge onto a highway. The only way to know which one is the gateway is the plates and the direction it's driving. Set the doctrine wrong and the ship swats a $2 million friendly out of the sky. Set it cautious and it hesitates half a second on a real Noor. At Mach 0.09, that's 150 meters. The Teo's board stayed clean. 60 miles inshore, the strike aircraft were flying into a problem no network could see coming. In the hills east of the port, a third Khordad crew sat with their radar cold and their engines idling. Launcher and radar ride one track chassis, the same family of system that reached up and took down an American RQ-4 Global Hawk over the strait in 2019. Its crew had learned the cost of transmitting the hard way. Radiate and a harm comes straight down the beam. A high-speed anti-radiation missile. They had watched it happen to two batteries since lunch. The war was 11 hours old, and it had already taught everyone its first rule. So this evening, they hunted with heat instead. If you look here, bolted inside the radar dish, that little aperture is an electro-optical tracker, a stabilized thermal telescope that watches for jet exhaust against cool sky and never transmits a thing. It can't guide a missile on its own, but it can tell the crew exactly where to point the radar before they ever switch it on. And it's invisible where it counts. An American radar warning receiver listens for radar. Against a telescope, it has nothing to hear. A strike pilot could fly right down its line of sight and its cockpit would stay perfectly, fatally quiet. Watch, 8 seconds from radar snap up to Tear 2, the missile riding on the Khordad's back, leaving the rail. 30 seconds of radar, start to finish. They'd guide it home and go dark before a harm could fly the distance back down the beam. That was the wager. The F-18 strike lead, call sign Uppercut 2-1, knew a battery was out there. His last satellite pass had it 15 kilometers south, and he had bent his whole ingress around that box, a detour costing 40 extra miles and 2,000 pounds of gas to keep the threat off his nose. What he couldn't know was that the battery had moved at sundown. His new route didn't avoid the ambush. It ran right down its bearing. 22 minutes to impact. A loaded gun in the hills, a jamming window stretched 12 minutes past its design, and 9 missiles running for a coast that already knew something was coming. The lead Tomahawks crossed into the strait itself, and the water turned crowded fast. A loaded tanker filled the lead missile's path. The weapon banked, threaded the gap between the tanker's stern and a coastal freighter, and settled back into its line. Low enough that a lookout on the rail would have felt the wash before he heard the engine. Under its belly, a radar altimeter pings straight down, reads altitude off the echo, and holds the weapon 10 to 15 meters over the busiest oil checkpoint on Earth. Every bank costs fuel. With the coastal radar blinded, the missiles climbed off the deck between the traffic and ran straight. Staying low only matters while somebody can see you. 12 minutes to impact, and inside the static, the lookout was clawing his way back. The coastal operator had been working the problem for a quarter of an hour, and he worked it like a professional. Transmitter power up, sweep narrowed into missile's last plotted line. The field of static began to thin. Faint returns seep through, real ones. Jamming degrades. As the target closes, the radar's own return grows until, at the burn-through range, it punches back through the noise and sees again. Shouting over a car engine. From across the street, you drown the driver out. In his face, you're nothing. The Growler shoved back with geometry and raw wattage, but the extra 12 minutes were costing it right where the planners feared, at the finish line. 9 minutes to impact. Then the Growler crew found its frequency shift and slammed the noise back over it. The returns vanished, and for the operator, blind was not the same as beaten. Blinded, the coastal operator did the one thing no jammer could stop. He keyed his radio. Voice, low band, below anything the American receivers were tuned to hunt, and passed his last clean plot to the battery in the hills, strike aircraft, bearing 160, coming down the only lane into the port. The Khordad crew had waited 3 hours for that call. The engagement radar snapped up and the stopwatch started. In Uppercut 2-1's cockpit, the radar warning receiver went from silent to shrieking in the same instant. Full fire control lock. Close, spot on the route he'd bent specifically to avoid. Chaff, beam turn, the brake slamming him sideways into the harness hard enough to grade the edges of his vision. 3 seconds gone. A tear 2 screamed off the rail at Mach 3, and now 2 missiles were in the air with 1 radar between them. Command guidance. The radar in the hills was steering the tear every meter of the way, like a kid with an RC car, hands on the controller the whole run. Drop the controller and the car plows straight ahead. The tear needed that radar alive for another 20 seconds. An AGM-88G, fired from the Growler's escort station on the first sniff of the emission, was coming to switch it off. The Khordad needed 30 seconds of courage. It got 27. The HARM, driving on coordinates its seeker had already memorized, arrived while the tear was still 3 seconds from Uppercut 2-1's jet. Below him, the radar cut out mid-track, and the missile with no one steering it went ballistic, dumb, and wide. The first rule of this war held. Turning the radar on had cost them everything. Uppercut 2-1 rolled wings level with his heart rate somewhere above his airspeed. 3 seconds of margin. Bought by a Growler crew that fired on a sniff and a seeker that remembers. He had the fuel to turn south and a story no one would question. He pressed on toward the port instead. The route that was supposed to dodge the ambush was a conversion for the debrief. 6 minutes to impact. The problem stopped taking turns. 8 miles off the coast, the lead Tomahawk satellite fix began to rot. Over open water, there's no terrain to match against, so the weapon counts its own steps, inertial guidance, and lets GPS correct the drift. A GPS signal arrives from orbit as a whisper. Iran had parked a ground jammer on the coast to outshout it in the last few kilometers. Done right, that walks a weapon a few hundred meters off its aim point and into open water. No interception, just a lie fed into the signal the weapon trusts most. The Tomahawk stopped listening, leaned on the inertial system, and held its line. When the coastline finally rose, Dismac, the camera in its nose, facial recognition for buildings, snapped its position back into focus. You can jam a whisper, you can't jam a photograph. And with a defended coastline filling the nose camera's view, the weapons drop back onto the deck. The last miles will be flown where the radar sees worst. At that same moment, a Pantsir slewed onto the inbound stream from the port perimeter and hammered its first interceptor into the sky. The Pantsir is a Russian-built truck carrying anti-air missiles and twin cannons, the closest thing a port has to a goalkeeper. It detonated against the sea 50 meters short. The second fared no better. Competent crew, fast missiles, rigged geometry. At 10 meters over the sea, a Tomahawk sits down inside the radar's own surface clutter, and the proximity fuse can't tell the missile from the water. So it triggers early on the waves, or never fires at all. A motion sensor light in a rainstorm. Everything sets it off, or nothing does. The battery got 4 shots off before an AGM-88G, cued the moment its radar lit, showed up to explain the first rule of this war a second time. 3 minutes to impact. And Uppercut 2-1 ran his target list one last time with the fuel gauge arguing. The planning cell's math was simple. Anything fixed, defended, and known belonged to the Tomahawks. Fired from 260 miles away. Anything needing a human eye or a hardened penetrating hit belonged to him. You mail the certified letters that only need to arrive. You hand-deliver the ones that need a signature. The Tomahawks answer first. Crossing the beach at 550 miles per hour, the lead weapon matches the coastline against its stored scene and punches a 1,000-pound warhead through the roof of the first anti-ship missile shelter. The shelter folds inward. What just crossed the beach? The BGM-109 Tomahawk, a 3,000-pound cruise missile the length of a canoe, riding a small jet engine at 550 miles an hour, carrying that 1,000-pound warhead the better part of San Diego to Denver and landing inside the length of a parked car. 3 more arrive on interval. The command node takes 2 and stops being a building. And every launcher on this coast is suddenly firing half blind, if it fires at all. No American has flown within 30 miles of any of it. The Hornets roll in behind. The port operations block takes a 2,000-pound GBU-31, a satellite-guided bomb, through the roof and detonates from the inside out. Along the waterfront, the boat sheds rip open in a chain of secondary blasts, fuel and ordnance cooking off inside. In those shelters sat the weapons from that morning's tanker attack, 11 hours from launch to landfill. And out of the burning piers, dozens of small, fast wakes push into open water. They didn't come as a wall, they came scattered. Ones and twos, throttles pinned, spreading across miles of open water on a simple bet. Small and dispersed beats a slow targeting cycle. Iran had rehearsed that bet for 40 years, ever since the tanker war of the 1980s. Dozens of cheap hulls in packs, so no expensive weapon could ever pay for all of them. This was the first evening the rehearsal met the real answer. The bet lasted 90 seconds. Uppercut 2-1. Picture: 30-plus surface contacts outbound Shahid Haghani. Tracks passing now. On the lead skiff, the coxswain had the throttle up against the stop and the bow slapping 4-foot chop. Behind him, the piers he'd launched from were a wall of orange light. Ahead, nothing. Black water, black sky, the running lights of tankers miles out. This was the doctrine working exactly as drawn. Disperse, close fast, make the enemy solve 30 problems at once. Every rehearsal for 40 years had ended the same way. The umpires ruled the big ships overwhelmed, and everyone went home vindicated. The rehearsals all shared one assumption: that the enemy would be looking at him. He scanned the dark for a helicopter, a wake, a gun flash. There was nothing to see. The thing that had already killed him was a track number on a screen at 25,000 feet and a laser spot, invisible, resting on his hull. High over the Gulf, an E-2D Hawkeye orbiting at 25,000 feet was turning every one of those wakes into a track with a number on it. The numbers reached the shooters before the boats cleared the harbor mouth. Altitude buys horizon. From 5 miles up, the rotating dome on the Hawkeye's back sees a patch of sea no ship's mast could ever reach, stitches every small boat return into one picture, and feeds each track over the shared data network. One fighter sweeping its own narrow cone could never build that picture. Boats slip around the edges. It's the difference between spotting a rip current from the water and spotting it from the lifeguard chair. The lead Hornet took a vector to a boat its own radar couldn't even see yet, and the swarm stopped being a swarm. It became a to-do list. None of it matters if you can't afford the ammunition to work through it, and there were a lot of boats. The lead Hornet rolled in on track 1, held a laser on the boat, and ripped a single 70mm rocket off the rail. 2 seconds of flight. The skiff came apart in a geyser of white water. Cost of the shot, about $28,000, less than the truck that towed that boat to the pier. If you look here at the 4 small windows on the canards, those are the seeker optics of the APKWS. The kit costs $25,000 and bolts a laser seeker into the steering fins of a standard unguided Hydra 70 rocket. The optics only need to catch reflected laser light after launch. That's the whole trick. 7-round pods under the wings mean a dozen-plus precise shots per pass, every one of them cheaper than the thing it's aimed at. Spend 1 expensive round per target, and the magazine runs dry long before 30 boats do. A $2 million Tomahawk loses that exchange every time. A $150,000 Hellfire just loses it slower. A magazine full of these doesn't run dry at all. The Flies finally met a fly swatter instead of a nail gun. The Hornets worked down the Hawkeye's list. Boat after boat vanished in spray and splinters. Back on the destroyer, the fight collapsed to a knife range, and so did the margin for error. On forward deckhouse, a missile launcher slewed hard, tracked low, fast shape crossing the bow at 200 feet, and held its fire. The shape was a friendly Hornet, empty rails, egressing home. The mount had challenged it automatically. Identification friend or foe, a Mode 5 interrogation. The coded question every American aircraft answers without its pilot lifting a finger, and the reply arrived in milliseconds. That mount was the ship's knife fight layer, a close-in weapons system, Sea Whiz, that spits 4,500 rounds a minute. It exists to stop a boat charging the hull or a leaker Noor in the last seconds of its run. A bouncer swinging in a packed room who has to land his fists only on the people throwing punches. The only thing between that Hornet and a live intercept was that Mode 5 reply and the invisible scaffolding under the whole evening. Pre-brief corridors, stacked altitude blocks, and data network sorting every shooter by lane, by altitude, and by the clock. An air traffic grid laid over a bar fight. It never shows up in a briefing graphic, and it was the single most important weapon in the battle space. The last boat steadied up on the destroyer's bow, throttle wide open, 4,000 meters. A Hornet tipped in above it, 2,500. Laser on, spot ready on the pitching hull. At 1,000 meters, the final rocket followed it down. Charge over. The Hawkeye's picture went quiet, 1 track at a time. Over Shahid Haghani, the smoke leaned east in the evening wind. Tall enough that a master of a laden tanker inbound from Fujairah watched it climb for a full hour before his bow ever crossed the line. If you enjoyed this video, then watch how the US hammered Iran the first time. Bye for now.